Shabbat Shalom, almost. Shabbat Parshat Reeh. Chaim Olevsky here, Chabad Family Programs of the West Side. In 9/11, 1941, the soon-to-be Lubavitcher Rebbe, about 9 years before he assumed official status as Rebbe, he penned in his personal private journal a few words that are learned to this day. Many of the Rebbe's teachings actually were found in his desk after his passing, and they are studied today with great passion. Beautiful. Here's one of them, just a few words. So in this week's Torah portion, Parshat Reeh, among many other things, Reeh means see the light. It starts off, Reeh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha ukala. Today you should see the difference between the good and the opposite in the world, and that itself is a blessing, to be able to know the difference between good and otherwise. Among the many matters in this week's Torah portion talks about the signs of a kosher animal. What is kosher, what is not, what we eat, what we don't. The Torah says, this you shall eat, this you may eat from all the fish of the sea. One who has both scales and fins. Snapir v'kaskeset. Fins and scales. That makes a kosher fish. And then there are kosher signs for the animal. They're chewing its cud and having split hooves, etc. Regarding the fish, the Torah says two signs, scales and fins. The Talmud talks about this and says we have a tradition that any fish that has scales already has fins and is kosher. So we don't need both signs. We don't need to see both scales and fins. Once you see scales, you know the tradition is that the fish that has scales has fins. You don't need to find the fins on the fish, and you can eat it if you're out camping in the summer or in the wilderness. And then the Talmud asks, if so, why does the Torah even mention fins if we don't need them as a kosher sign? And the Talmud goes on and explains, Lahagdil Torah ulahadira. God is giving an opportunity for the Jewish people to learn more Torah. So he threw in a few extra words. That's one of the reasons. The Rebbe talks about this and on a deeper level. And we can ask the question over here, first of all, what is? In the Rebbe's beautiful approach to the Torah, everything in this world, and every law and word in the Torah, has its practical relevance in our day-to-day lives. So what is the relevance of fins and scales in our life? And also, going back to the Talmud's question, if all we really need is scales, why does the Torah mention fins? In preface to understand this, the Rebbe's few lines, which we didn't get to yet. An understanding is that the Kabbalah tells us that every physical item, whether it's mineral, inanimate, vegetation, animal or human, its form and its shape and its dimensions reflect the spiritual quality and the psychological makeup of this item. And the same is with the fish. So something to do with the nature of the fish and fins and scales, and the same with us, as we will soon see. Also, the Kabbalah says, and the biblical commentators actually tell us, I think it's the Ramban, that the qualities inherent in an animal are transferred to those who eat it. So, hence, says the Ramban, that we don't eat all the kosher animals that the Torah lists are non-predatory. We don't want to eat a predator, even though my personal favorite animal in the whole wide world is a leopard. But I will never eat it because it's not kosher. because those things that I really appreciate about it, it's not good for me as a human being. Well, some of them. Anyway, so we have this as a preface, so now going back to the questions, what are fins and scales for us and the relevance in our lives, and why do we need both? Says the Rebbe. The Rebbe was talking in his private journal, we call it Rishimus. He was talking in the context of Torah study and people who study Torah in the world of Torah, but we're going to expand this as Rabbi Yossi Jacobson so eloquently did on Chabad.org. You can see it there under this week's Parsha. We'll expand it to life in general, to Judaism and life in general. And the Rebbe says that just as the scales protect the fish from outside, from its surroundings, so too in our life we have scales. That is the Yirאת Shamayim. We have the fear of heaven, the absolute standard of what God wants is my will. And otherwise in English we'll call it integrity. So the scales protect the fish from outside negative forces. Our integrity protects us from the influences, from the outside influences of the world. A person with integrity has a moral standard of right and wrong, which will not waver despite the temptations and distractions and the invitations that and the assumed benefit and gain that non-integrity character will yield us. Lying, stealing, cheating, etc. So a person of integrity will transcend the lures of the world. And that's the scales. So we need to have scales in our life. We need to have Yirאת Shamayim, the fear of heaven. We need to have the integrity to withstand the world's obstacles. Further on, says the Rebbe, the fins propel the fish forward and take it to where it wants to go. The fins, in the Rebbe's note, is the power of Hidush, the power to innovate, to create something new, innovation. Otherwise, we'll call it today ambition. Ambition to go places, to create new vistas, to find new horizons, and to develop our maximum potential in the best way possible. Those are the fins that propel us forward. Which is more important, the scales or the fins? Says the Rebbe, look at the Talmud. The Talmud tells us that there's two signs for a kosher fish, the scales and the fins. The Talmud tells us that a fish that has scales is automatically kosher because you know it has fins, but not the other way around. If you find a fish that has only fins and you don't see the scales, it's not kosher. You can't eat it and you can't be it, says the Rebbe. In our makeup, in our human design, in order to be productive human beings, proper human beings, in a holy way, in a constructive way, we need to have scales. We need to have integrity, Yirאת Shamayim, fear of heaven, absolute standard of morality. Then we're a kosher person, like the fish is kosher. If we have ambition alone, many people had ambition in the world, in the history, but they lacked the moral compass, and that was not good for the Jews or for anyone. Says the Rebbe, look what the Talmud is telling us. We need both. The Torah actually mentions both. We need to have scales in order to be kosher. But the Torah mentions both to tell us that fins, ambition is also important. We need to seek out to affect our world in a positive way, to make this world a better place. And not only that, the Talmud tells us, our tradition has it, that if you have scales, you've already got fins. If you have ambition, if you have integrity, if you are a man of integrity or a woman of integrity, then you already have inside, you've got those fins. You've got to flap them and fly. God bless you. Shabbat Shalom. Hope all is well with you and yours. Share.